just about the Gog and Magog war. There's a lot of rumors that people believe that'll happen before the tribulation. And wanted to walk you through, well, when is it going to happen? When in the Bible does the Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39 Gog Magog war or wars happen, and then how do they relate to Revelation? Because there is a parallel. So let's walk through it. So as you can see, there is a map of Israel, and we'll reference that as we talk about nations. God's talking to Ezekiel and talking about Gog and the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshesh and Tubal, and the prophecy against him. So who's handling the source? So it tells you in verse 5, Persia, Ethiopia. So Persia is sort of, if you go back to the map, but we'll talk about in a minute, Ethiopia, Libya, and then the Gomer and all his bands, and the house of Togomar in the north quarters. So that's in verse 6, north. So everything is centered when they talk in the Bible around Israel and Jerusalem, the holy city. So obviously it mentioned Libya, it mentioned Ethiopia, so obviously here, south, but then it talked about the bands of the north. It talked about, if you go back, it mentioned Gomer and the bands of, and then Persia. So where's Persia? This area is sort of Persia. And then, so those are all Muslim nations. And then it goes further north into Russia. And so if you look here, Gomer has always been known as Russia. So that is the group that will descend in Ezekiel 38 upon Israel in the mountains. And what will happen is these armies will come out of the north. And in verse 15, and thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, many people with them, all riding upon horses, a great company and a mighty army. And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel. So they're going to come upon the nation of Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days, and it will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me. So these are non-Jews. When I shall be sanctified in thee, O God, before thy eyes. What's going to happen here is God's going to go against these people. That my fury shall come upon in my face, for I am a jealousy, and in fire of my wrath is spoken. Surely on that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel. So basically, God is going to take his sword into those mountains, and what he will do is rain down upon them fire and brimstone. So it talks about, I will rain upon him and upon his bands, those are the bands of the people attacking Israel, and upon many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstorms, fire, and brimstone. We've seen that before in the Bible with Sodom and Gomorrah. So essentially God is going to show his power down upon these armies. So the question becomes, what time period does this happen? We're in the church age now. There'll be a rapture. And what people wonder, is this going to happen before we get raptured? Or maybe it's in the tribulation, or maybe it's in the millennium. So Ezekiel 38 matches Revelation 20. And just so you know, that time period is after the millennium. So this is the after the tribulation time period, and then there's perfect peace. There'll be another war. Ezekiel 38 is that war after the millennium. And so that goes with Revelation 20. And we'll go there now to verse 11. Also, a lot of people believe that Ezekiel 38 and 39 are the same war. They're two different wars in two different time periods, often with the same set of people that raise up. But the men never learn. They always rise up and rebel against God. And the armies in the future will do the same. So if we go down to verse 11. here we go. And we'll start at verse 8. And Satan will be loosed out of prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, and the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So we saw in Ezekiel 38 that they were also in such large mass army, mass numbers, that you couldn't count. So essentially this matches Gog and Magog, and that is after Satan is loosed, after at the end of the millennium, he goes out and gathers, and so that was a time of peace for Israel, and then all of a sudden Satan then starts up trouble and gathers these armies. So that to worry about this war is really something that is going to really be, even if the tribulation were to start tomorrow, or next month or 3 months from now, it would happen 1,007 years or more. Could be more. The Gog and Magog war of Ezekiel 38. Now, if you look at Ezekiel 39, this war actually happens sooner. We are actually closer to this war than we are Ezekiel 38. So let's take a look at that. And in my opinion, this war will either be what's World War III or World War IV. There is a chance there could be a war before the tribulation begins. And so, just so you know, Ezekiel 39 goes with Revelation 19. So we'll take a look at Ezekiel chapter 30, 39. All right. Therefore, son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief of princes. And so it starts out similar to 38. That's why a lot of people think it's the same war. And I will turn thee back and leave but the sixth part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring again unto the mountain of Israel. So again, they're gonna bring the armies against God's people of Israel. And I will smite thee thy bow out of thy left hand, I will cause thine arrows to fall out of thy right hand. Thou shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel, and thy bands, and thy people that are with thee. I will give thee unto the ravenous birds of every sort, and the beasts of the field to be devoured. So this army that rises up against God will be destroyed, and not only will they be destroyed, but they will be given unto the ravenous birds. And God, in verses 8 and 9, shall set fire and burn all the weapons in verse 9. So after that battle, essentially all the weapons will be burned up. Both the shields, the bucklers, the bows, and the arrows, and the hand staves and the spears, all shall burn for a period of time, tells you 7 years. And so that there shall take no wood out of the field, neither cut down any of the forest, for they shall burn the weapons with fire, and they shall spoil those that spoiled them, and rob those that robbed them. So essentially they're going to just be left there to dead for 7 years burning. So sort of sounds like, really catastrophic judgment of the heathens by God. If you go a little further down in verse 17, it'll again speak of those feathered fowls, and will gather themselves to eat the flesh and the blood. And in verse 18, you shall eat the flesh of the mighty, drink the blood of the princes of the earth, and the rams, lambs, and goats, and bullocks, and their fatlings. And so basically, these mighty men, these chariots will be destroyed and judged. The heathen will be judged and executed. In verse 21, it shows how God put his judgment upon that. And this is the Battle of Armageddon, is what this is. And the Battle of Armageddon is at the end of the tribulation period of time, at the second coming, when Christ comes down. And that's when Jesus has his eyes, with a flame of fire. I think at verse 12 it shows that. And God will cleanse the land. and burn them up. And Revelation 19, 2 Thessalonians 1, and Matthew 25 also describe the Battle of Armageddon, if you want to check it out there. Revelation, now we're going to go to 19. And if you start at verse 12, his eyes were a flame of fire, his being Jesus. And his head were of many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood. So that's when Jesus with the saints will ride down and go along the King's Highway, and at the Battle of Armageddon in the mountains destroy with fire of flame the enemies of Jesus. And it basically will be like so much blood that flows, and the bottom of the robe of the vesture, it's like a cloth covering, will be dipped in blood. And that shows that. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, and with it shall smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. He shall treadeth the winepress of fierceness and the wrath of Almighty God. And so it goes into in verse 17 and 18, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of the captains, and the flesh of the mighty men, and the flesh of the horses, and them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bound, both small. Who should eat it? It's going to be the fowls. So verse 17, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather yourselves at the great supper of God. So this matches where those fowls of the earth in Ezekiel 39 eat the flesh and the blood of at the Battle of Armageddon, the nations that were destroyed by God, by Jesus. So it shows, the wrath that God has upon, that army. And then at the end of that, the false prophet, the beast, the Antichrist, are all captured, put into hell, and that starts the millennium, which is the 1,000-year period. And the Ezekiel 38 war comes at the end of the millennium when Satan is loosed in Revelation 20. So I just wanted to show that because there's a lot of confusion around. Is it going to happen before the tribulation? No, it won't. It's a time frame at the Ezekiel wars. There's two of them, and the time period is after the rapture, and Ezekiel 39 is at the end of the tribulation, and that would be the Battle of Armageddon, the second coming of Jesus Christ, with the saints that ride down in that battle. And then Ezekiel 38 war is when Satan is loosed. It corresponds to Revelation 20, where he gathers the armies from the four corners, and they again descend upon the mountain of Israel, and again they are destroyed. That Ezekiel 38 war happens after the millennium, and that is when Satan is destroyed forever. And then after that, God creates a new heaven and a new Jerusalem and a new earth, and we live forever. So that essentially was there's a lot of confusion with that. I thought I'd bring that to light. Hope this message was a blessing.